Oh, good golly, good golly. What a day. Whew. Anyone else feeling kind of tired? Ready to sit back, relax with your old buddy Chris on the Toronto Beer Podcast with me, your host, Chris Schreier, and the sound of my garbage bins being moved out. Because if you are in the right spot. And you know that because you are about to listen to the Currie brothers. Take it away, Rob Currie. Yes, indeed. The Currie brothers playing Link Ray Gun, which I erroneously called the third track on their record. We Are the Currie brothers. It is indeed the second. I realized the error of my ways after making that claim there last week. I got some other business I gotta settle too. It has to do with Amsterdam and when the Calm Before the Storm release is. If you thought you missed it, you have not yet. But we will get to that. But before we get to that, you know what we need to do? We need to drink some beers. Beer, singular, probably. I'm going to have another one after this, but your mileage may vary. But this is a mean, big, big beer. So we'll have to see how that goes. That's actually another thing I need to correct myself on. This is the ultimate episode of Beaumont's Belgian Beer Month, which I realized in the last podcast I frequently referred to as Belmont's Belgian Beer Month. Seems Beaumont, but the Belgian, I don't know. It's a shame his last name isn't Belmont. It would certainly make it easier. It would make it easier. But I digress. It is the last week of Beaumont's Belgian Beer Month, and we are still shining the light on Belgian and Belgian style beers. And of course, well, what have we done? We've done a triple. That was delightful. We did not a lambic, but like a lambic, a spontaneously fermented beer from our friends at Bell Woods. Then we did do the quad last week, the Rochefort 10. Where are we going to go this week? You might be asking, oh, a wit beer, perhaps? A white? Oh, that's a nice style of beer. What about, well, as noted, like a different sour fermented ale, like a Rodenbach? Oh, I wouldn't say no to that either. What about like what we would call a double in the Abbey styles, like the Chimay Red or the Rochefort 6, for instance? Hey, those are nice beers. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, as much as there are some beautiful historical styles of beer produced in Belgium, often with unchanging technique for centuries, there's a real sense of tradition there, which we ought not neglect. The other important thing to remember is that within Belgium, and even at some old dusty breweries, you have people who genuinely love to make beer and like to do new and interesting things. And so tonight, indeed, we have a beer I've never heard of the brewery. Picked this up at 99 bottles last weekend or so. And I've kept it for tonight because this, if you're looking at the image, nice blue label on this, this is called Blidegarian Imperial Stout. It's from Brasserie de Blaugies. Blaugies? Blaugies. I would confess that I'm assuming French is not going to be up to snuff on that one. Interesting, though, an Imperial Stout. Historically, this is a style of beer produced in England, not Belgium, which obviously doesn't mean Belgians can't make it. But this was a style of beer that, again, historically was created to be shipped to St. Petersburg in Russia, which was not the seat of power, but where the royals would spend a significant time of the year in just one of the most beautiful palaces you've ever laid eyes upon. And they had a taste for a stout beer, a nice dark black beer, which was a style that was available in London, in England. But as with a lot of beers of that era, we're talking 150 years ago, no refrigeration on the voyage. a standard dry stout would spoil by the time it made it to St. Petersburg, or at least it wouldn't necessarily spoil, but it would not be great, and maybe it spoiled. And as with the somewhat apocryphal story of India Pale Ale, the way that we can take a beer and make it travel better is to both increase the hops and, more importantly, the alcohol percentage. So whereas a typical dry English stout would be somewhere around the 4% mark, kind of 4 to 4.5% alcohol, imperial stouts were north of 7, often 8 or 9%, so double the alcohol content. And they would add extra hops as well, partially to offset that immense sweet and alcoholic bite, and also to add preservative factor. Um, Again, no idea what's going on with this beer. Picked it up at 99 bottles on a lark. Looked interesting. Thought Imperial Stout, Belgium. Why the heck not? It is, if you're looking at the video, caged and corked. So it will take me just a moment to undress this cork and loose it from the neck of this here bottle. And pardon me, I have an itch on my kidney. I think I have fleas. Actually, I think what it is just sometimes with tattoos healing, it's been a while, and you just get these weird little ghost itches. I think it's scar tissue breaking down or something. Anyway, the cage has been removed. The cork is not trying to remove itself, which is always nice. Little leery, no experience with this beer. Is it gonna flow everywhere, or is it gonna go just in the glass? Well, there's really only one way to find out. Here we go. Oh wow, there's some pressure behind this. Not bad. No surge, just some Belgian air. Hello, welcome to Canada. Let's give this a. Oh, I'm not doing this on camera. Hang on. There we go. Now we're on camera. It's got a really fizzy, carbonated sound to it. It sounds a little bit like pouring a Coke. And you can see on the video, not a bad little head. It's kind of loose though. That's going to drop. I can tell you that already. It's not a very dense head. It's actually a head sort of reminiscent of soda, like Coke. So carbonation similar, sound to the pour similar, and then as noted, you can see in the video, head dropping remarkably. Yes, this is a Guinness glass. I hope that doesn't confuse you. It just happened to be the clean glass that landed in my hand. No, there's no reason that I'm drinking out of a Guinness glass other than availability. Although I suppose maybe I should have put this in a tulip too, but you know what? It's too late for that. We're just going to forge ahead. So, Belgian style Imperial Stout. Totally blank canvas here. Let's see what we see. Okay, so on the nose, right away, smells like an Imperial Stout. Nice. Sorry, this itch is just driving me crazy. It is healing tattoo itch. This is not appealing. It's not good podcast. Anyway, sorry. I'm gonna try and either ignore that or just discreetly keep itching that. Yeah. So very rich, dark roasted malts, touching on sort of coffee. It's actually very coffee-y, if I'm honest with you. Sort of like freshly roasted beans kind of coffee, in fact. This is making me think there might actually be coffee in this beer, but might just be the malts. Malts can have a really coffee-like aroma to them, so there's a bit of a sugary note that oddly isn't quite burnt sugar. Often in a stout like this, you expect a bit of a smoky burnt sugar thing. This is more like cane sugar on the aroma. Interesting. That's what I got. It's not even caramelly necessarily. It smells like cane sugar. There's also, I'm smelling the hop. I'm having trouble dialing in what it is, not specifically what it is, but even what I'm getting off of it. It's leafy is about all I can say about it. Like herbal kind of. Now it's interesting. I'm having trouble getting away from that initial. This sounds and looks like I'm pouring a glass of Coke because there is a sort of medicinally cola-like aroma here, which I'm going to assume is yeast. I don't know, but I'm guessing that they've used a Belgian yeast to ferment this. And as we've discussed, a lot of Belgian yeasts can kick off a lot of interesting off flavor. I say off flavors, they're not off flavors. They're bang on flavors actually. But whereas like a Cali ale yeast ferments very clean, doesn't produce a lot of particular flavors that are distinct to the yeast. Belgian yeast, on the other hand, that's like all it does. Makes alcohol and tastes like Belgian yeast. So yeah, with that cane sugary note and that spiciness that I'm assuming is the yeast, it has a real cola-like kind of quality to the aroma, but with coffee. My son mentioned the other day he heard or saw somebody on Instagram or YouTube or something mixing coffee and Coke, and he was like, "Who would do that?" It's like, well, son, there was a period in my life when I used to get a shot of espresso and a glass of Coke. So, your dear old dad, that's a bit of a different approach, but there's some synergy here between cola-like aromas and coffee-like aromas. To be fair, this is leaning a little heavier on the cola side, a little less on the coffee side. If you put a shot of espresso in a glass of Coke, you can still taste the Coke, but mostly what you taste is cold espresso. Just putting that out there. Mm. So I've taken a sip. I forgot to mention I was going to stick it in my drink hole. Oh, that's interesting. Huh. Yeah. So the malts do have a little bit of char to them on the palate, but it's not like burnt sugar. It's more like darkly roasted malts. There's a bit of cocoa to it, but a not insignificant cola-like spicy quality. And again, spicy, not picante, but spice covered spices. Couldn't say exactly what other than like cola nut, which smells like what you think cola smells like, just by the by. There's a maybe a hint of like maybe cherry to that cocoa-y taste. And then very clearly, but do we say like clearly but subtly? It's very clear that there's a coffee aroma and taste to this. And it feels so much like coffee that I don't think it's the malts. I think there's coffee in this, but I could be wrong. But it's not a dominant taste. The cola is far and away the most dominant taste, which again I think is the yeast. But there's this cocoa-y and then also like freshly roasted coffee bean kind of taste to it. The carbonation is bonkers. It's very carbonated. Again, kind of like a glass of soda. And if I'm honest with you, the mouth feels honestly a bit thin. But when you say the mouth feels thin, that sounds like a negative thing. It's not negative. In the context of an imperial stout, it's a little unexpected because imperial stouts tend to have a sort of syrupy almost quality to them, at least a medium, if not heavy mouth feel. That said, Belgian yeasts are notorious for being able to just chew through any sugar you throw at them. So it's entirely possible that the yeast that was used in this just completely cleared out all of the residual sugars, which is not entirely, but mostly what gives you weight in the beer. Let me have another sip. It's interesting because there's a softness to the beer, but there's so much carbonation. It's very fizzy carbonated. And there isn't a lot of sugary weight to it. So I'm not sure if I'm tricking myself here. Always say, you drink with your eyes, but you also kind of drink with your brain. It's really hard to approach something unless it's a completely new thing to you. It's really hard to approach it and not sort of prejudge it. So to me, an Imperial Stout, there's just like my sensors are probably a little overtuned for mouthfeel. So I might just be making something out of nothing here. But there isn't almost creaminess. It's just there's not a lot of weight to it. It's got a really interesting, nice mouthfeel. Oddly light for an Imperial Stout. And I know I haven't read the label too much, but I know it's 9%. It does not drink like a 9% beer. It's a little scary, if I'm honest with you. Yeah. And then the finish, a bit of bitter cocoa, a bit of roasty coffee, and a bit of an herbal tannic kind of hop finish. It's not a lingeringly sweet beer. Again, there's not a lot of residual sugar in here. Oh, and a bit of toast, very dark brown toast, which is almost certainly from the malts. Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting, tasty beer. A little surprising. Not surprising that the yeast is putting on such a show. Again, I'm assuming. I'm going to read the label in a minute and see if it gives me any insights. No idea. But a real cola like medicinally yeasty note. Not so much chocolate on the nose, but there's definitely a bit of like cocoa powder on the palate. Again, fresh roasted coffee beans. The more time I spend with this, I think I'm going to see that there's probably coffee in this beer. And then, yeah, like a lighter mouthfeel, but with a creaminess to it, a ton of carbonation, and then just a lingeringly cocoa-y bitter with a bit of a leafy, tannic, hoppy bitterness, and just some of that nice roasted coffee note lingering on your palate. It is an interesting, tasty beer. Let's go to the bottle. Blidegarian Imperial Stout, by the way, if you're just joining us. Doesn't look like anybody has, but that's all right. Got this in 99 bottles on Kingston Road, the bottle shop of Radical Road. This is a strong beer. Oh, they do list ingredients in a few locations. Well, okay. Well, I have them here in French and German, and I can already tell you I'm pretty smart. In German, we have water, which is spelled exactly the same. Then Gerstemalt, which I believe is malted barley. Havermalt, which I think is oats. Coffee, which is coffee. Sugar, which is sugar. Hop, and gist. Hop is hops, and yeast is yeast. Yeast. If you sprechen the Deutsch, which I don't, but I'm pretty good with ingredients in other languages. The ingredients in English, out of curiosity: water, barley malt, oat malt. Oh, interesting. So it is oats, but it's malted oats, which is not what you generally find in beer. More often than not, what you find is rolled oats or steel cup, but like raw oats, not malted oats. That's interesting. Coffee, sugar, hops, yeast, as I not predicted, translated. Mm. If I'd read the back label, I would have read that it says extra strong beer with coffee, 9% alcohol by volume, 375 milliliters, product of Belgium. And the best before date on this, just in case you were curious, is the 31st of December, 2025. They are well aware that this bad boy would keep, and would it ever? 9% in a caged and corked bottle. That would not be a bad bottle to buy and lie down and see what happens. The yeast characteristics would possibly change. Any hop will drop out of it eventually, but that coffee is going to stick around. Oh, and I mentioned it says sugar. I'm going to assume that's what I'm tasting is a bit of like candy sugar or like cane sugar. Yeah, there are oats, again, malted oats, and I don't know if that would factor into like, I wonder, do malted oats have less protein in them? Because when you add oats to beer and they add density and mouthfeel, it's predominantly from the proteins that the pardon me, the oats kick out. And so, do malted oats have the same protein impact? I don't know. I do not know, but I do know that this is a tasty, interesting beer. It's not like your average imperial stout from either England or the New World. We do a lot of New World style imperial stouts now here. Again, Tempest being an example that you might come across. Um, what's the name of the one from Nickelbrook? Bolshevik Bastard. That's another one. You'll see that there are others around. They tend to be much more malt driven, often with a significant, like a pronounced hoppy kind of bite. But the malts are really the show, and the yeast. A lot of the time, actually, what they're using is an English ale yeast because again, it's an English style of beer. So you just need an English ale yeast that has a higher alcohol tolerance than maybe some of the more typical ale styles of yeast. Um, but this one with that Belgian yeast characteristic, which I'm assuming is where that Coca-Cola like flavor profile is coming from. Um, yeah, with this kind of cocoa-y bitter coffee like with again some kind of brown bread, bit of like yeah, candy or maybe cane sugar. It's an interesting, tasty beer. I would caution you, it doesn't quite drink like a soda. It's not that sweet, but it drinks surprisingly easily for a 9% beer. Like surprisingly. Now, what are you going to eat with Blidegarian Imperial Stout from Brasserie de Blaugies? Um, it's actually a really interesting question. It's not super smoky, which is saying something for a beer this dark. So we're not necessarily going to go in the direction of like barbecue. It would work, especially in some of the more kind of modern takes where they're doing things like a Dr. Pepper marinade, something like that. That could be interesting. You could play some different medicinally soda-like flavors against each other. That could work. This would be really good if you were making s'mores around the campfire. It'd be delicious with s'mores. For a 9% beer, not particularly warming, so maybe summertime s'mores. Um, but tasty there. You know, it's interesting with cheeses, especially with imperial stouts. I often recommend to go with a really aggressive blue, salty and funky. Um, I, I don't know if that's actually going to do any favors here, or if either of these are going to do favors to each other. Sounds kind of dirty when you put it that way, but not my intention. You know, sometimes you get cheeses that are like medium to old, hard, like, well, you get it with Beamsters and you get it with Cheddars sometimes, and you get an almost caramelly like sweetness that I think comes from moisture extraction in the cheese. Anyway, that probably would actually be an interesting taste if you can find some of that. Montfort Dairy, if they're still around and kicking, and gosh, I hope they are. They have had a couple of cheeses in the past that have that almost caramelly like sweetness. I mean, they still taste like dairy, they still taste funky like cheese, but there's this caramelly sweet quality to them that I think if you could get a cheese that did a bit of that with this beer, that could be very, very cool. Um, Otherwise, like not just like the store-bought pumpernickel bread that you're gonna make a spinach dip and scoop out the middle and turn it into a bowl. Super awesome, by the way. Do that more often. But a nice, like, artisanally pumpernickel or like black bread, which is like a German thing. Um, Maybe just lightly toasted, grilled, with a bit of butter on it. That would be really tasty with this. This beer could actually kind of Could be interesting with something with a bit of Marmite on it if you like that. Marmite's pretty yeasty, but this beer could probably keep up with that, especially with the effervescence. It could help kind of cut down some of the more heavy flavor qualities to that delicious, delicious food product. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Blidegarian Imperial Stout. Probably mispronouncing that. I'm sorry. Brasserie de Blaugies. Uh, an unusual but very delicious take on the English style of beer of Imperial Stout made with a real Belgian twist. And well, I like it. I like it a lot. It was, I believe it was a bit of a spendy bottle. I think it was like 11 or 12 bucks. So you probably wouldn't want to have a bunch of them in one sitting, but certainly enjoy one or two. It's really tasty. Mm. Mm-mm-mm. Yep. I like that beer. Now, as noted, I had the date wrong for the Amsterdam stuff for Calm Before the Storm and for Tempest. That's this weekend. Uh, I'd initially said to Ian when he mentioned that, I thought, that's probably actually easier for me anyway. I'm gonna have to see if I'm actually gonna get down for that. I would love to, but Saturday evening, afternoon, late afternoon, we're hosting the silent auction fundraiser for the rugby club down at the Balmy Beach Club, where we are auctioning off a whole whack of really great things just to support our section. You know, we have to buy kit and we have to buy new balls and a surprising amount of tape. Actually, it's not that surprising if you watch rugby, but that tape has to come from somewhere, and that tape ain't free. So we spend a not insignificant amount on tape. But anyway, to support the program, and actually the silent auction supports all levels of the rugby. So from right down my littlest U6s right up to the senior men's and women's and everyone in between gets supported by that. So I'm going to be heading down to that. Um, Spending some time checking out the auctions, having some beers, yeah, being part of the club. And then speaking of being part of the club, our beloved, uh, I don't even know how many adjectives to attach, but our wonderful, funny, highly talented, and incredibly Irish number 10, Stephen Doodoo Dwyer, is unfortunately, but good for him, heading back to the Emerald Isle, as they call it, with his fiancee. To be wed and to start their lives there together as a married couple. And we wish him very well, and they depart from Toronto after living here for like 5 years or something next week. So we're sending him off Saturday night, and if you can picture it, it's probably not out of the question. It's gonna be loose that night, so I'll be doing that as well. So my weekend might be a little tied up, but if you can get yourself down to Amsterdam, I would highly recommend it. I'm going to endeavor to get myself some of that delicious, delightful beer through another channel, perhaps, or maybe just nip down there first. So it's a nice bike ride, depending on the weather on Saturday. I'm not sure what the weather's meant to be this weekend. We'll have to see. But that is what's happening there. And actually, I think the auction's open. I don't think it's a club only event. So if you're in the East End and you want to come down and support our rugby club and bid on stuff, we've got like, I don't know, all sorts. Yeti coolers and tumblers and haircut from a really hipster kick-ass barber shop. And I don't know, it's just scrolling through not that long ago, seeing all sorts of stuff. Bunch of things from the community, a bunch of businesses have donated, products or services. And anyway, it's going to be a ton of fun and it's going to be beer to drink and items to bid on. So I think it's an open event. So come on down, 360 Lakefront, Balmy Beach Club. I don't know the timing. It's like in the afternoon, 3 or something like that, around there. Come on down. I'll probably be there if I figure out what the timing is. Also, speaking of rugby, the Autumn Internationals just finally finished with the last weekend of out of window matches. One which ended very much how I would like to see it end, and the other ending very much how I would not like to see a match end. Wales squandered a ridiculous lead to successfully lose to Australia, shockingly, um, in Cardiff. Hard to see how the WRU can move forward, unfortunately, with the head coach, who, in his defense, is working with a pretty short stack deck, but when you lose the change room, you lose the change room. And it looked like their performance when they were firing on all cylinders was very much to do with the presence of Alan Wynne Jones and less to do with Wayne Payback. So I'm not a person to jump down the throat of the coach the instant something goes wrong, but I think they're 3 for 11 this year, including losses to Italy and Georgia. So that's not a good look. And that's there's going to be some soul searching, and I think some phone calls to a Kiwi by the name of Warren Gatland to see what his next 12 months or so is looking like. Uh, yeah, he's not taking the New Zealand job. That looks stitched up, so he might be available. Who knows? We named a gate after him in Wales, so it's not like he's not welcome back. The other match, which was delightful, was England just getting systematically destroyed by a vastly superior South African team, who admittedly were missing some important players and went down to 14 men with 15 minutes left to go or something, and still just smashed them, came off the line with hunger, pushed them back on defense. It was amazing. Um, I know a lot of people like to hate on South Africa. I think the behavior of their, I don't even know what his title is anymore, Rassie Erasmus, their former coach, manager, DOR, I don't know what he is now. Anyway, he's a giant jackass and he needs to sort himself out and maybe not post things to social media when he's been drinking. But outside of that, man, what a fantastic game. They just it was next level. It was like watching a tier 1 nation against a tier 2 nation. And to be fair, I heard a statistic today. England's number 5 in the world right now behind Ireland, France, New Zealand, South Africa, I think in that order. And in their last games, they lost to Ireland, lost to France, drew against New Zealand, and lost to South Africa. So hard to see how they could picture themselves anywhere near a top 3 position right now. And gosh, it couldn't happen to a nicer country than England. So enjoy that, England. While this Welsh fan is, sadly gazing from, 3 blocks behind you. Anyway, that's what's happening in rugby. Hey, did any of that interest you? Do you want to know more about that? Our kids' winter programming kicks off the first week of January. Look up Bombing Beach Rugby, junior rugby, on the socials. You can get all the information. We're going to be running a training skills academy on Saturdays and a bit of fun pickup and some skills for the younger guys on Sundays. So check it out if you are interested, or message me. I'm easy to find. I can connect you to all the right people. Top secret. I'm the person for a lot of that, so you'll already be connected. It's like we'll have cut out the middleman. But I digress. A lot of rugby going down. 'Tis the season, as they say. Uh, Speaking of 'tis the season, as they say, next week is, of course, the first Monday in December. Advent did start this past Sunday, if you adhere to what we call the Christian calendar. Advent, of course, the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, a little bit like Lent, which people are familiar with from the whole giving something up for Lent. I had a girl at the church ask me, a little young child, the age of my daughter, sort of 10, 11-ish. She said, "Oh, have you decided what you're giving up for Advent?" And I said, "I'm not giving up anything for Advent." And she went, "What?" And I said, "I think you're thinking of Lent. It's a different season. But if you want to give up something for Advent, hey, go for it. It's a time of spiritual preparation, and fasting, even if it isn't necessarily from food, can be a useful tool in the toolbox of the potential worshiper. So if you want to give up something for Advent, go for it. Whatever it takes to get yourself into that headspace to be ready to celebrate a major holiday. And if you are agnostic, atheist, or not Christian, which is like 8/9 of the world or so, um, hey, cool. It's still, if you want to enjoy some Christmas time, I would say if you haven't already, now is the time to start getting into that. So, with that in mind, the Toronto Beer Podcast will be shifting into a more Christmassy outlook for the month of December. Advent, the time of preparation for Christmas. Well, perhaps we'll treat the podcast as a time of preparation to uh, maybe suggesting some things that you might like to have in the icebox for festive parties. Maybe things you might like to have in the icebox for the big day, whatever the big day is for you in the holiday season. And maybe just some things that just seem really obvious, like there are some very obviously advertised Christmas type beers. So we'll see. We got a couple of weeks before the big day, and I would be happy to drink some festive libations with you, my friends, here on the Toronto Beer Podcast. Until next Monday, remember this weekend coming up, Calm Before the Storm and Tempest. Get down to Amsterdam, check that out. If you're in the East End and you want to come put some bids on a silent auction, 360 Lakefront, that is the Bombay Beach Club's address. It's at the bottom of Beach Avenue, but it has a lakefront address because it isn't actually attached to any street. So come on down there, bid on some stuff, have a few beers. If you want to meet some rugby people, there will be a bunch of us there. And then you're not invited to Dudu's going away party, but it is at the Hideout. And I'm sure if you showed up and just wanted to get, messy drunk, depending on what time you show up, I mean, most of us will be there anyways. So get it in you. Not that I condone that sort of behavior. Do as I say, not as I do. If you want to pick up this beer we've been drinking tonight, it is once again Blidegarian Imperial Stout, Belgian Imperial Stout. Really nice stuff. Got that at 99 bottles. Even if you don't want that, you should go buy 99 bottles. Super, super cool shop. Fantastic wine and spirit selection. Sell a bunch of the Radical Road beers and a couple of imported other things, as well as some cool, tasty munchies and pantry items. So, and just a super friendly, cool spot. You can go in and get a glass of wine or beer and sit and just drink it. It's not a bar; it's like a tasting room. I don't know what the legality is, but it's nice. So you might want to check them out. 99 bottles, Kingston Road, and I think Willow, technically. So you can look them up. I sure would. Anyway, that's it for tonight. I hope you're well. I hope your preparations for the festive season are kicking off as I suggest. And I will be back here in 7 days to talk at you more about beer. And if we're honest, probably rugby. Rob Currie, why don't you play us out? And remember, guys, check out that Rob Currie album. It is in the description. It would make a great holiday present to somebody you love, especially if they like awesome sounding music. So check it out. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.